Later, General Flavius Silva sat in his oval-shaped campaign bath, which was of bronze and lavishly ornamented at both ends with rams' heads. It had been given to him by his godfather, Sejanus Piso, a name revered in Roman military society, and the occasion had been Silva's original assignment as a tribune with the 7th Legion in Dalmatia. He had not then intended to serve more than the customary 6 months, after which he would strive for a senatorial career. Alas, he thought, such a divergence was now highly unlikely. I may be a procurator newly appointed, but for more than 15 years I have been the world's most dedicated procrastinator. Witness how I have contrived to postpone every separation from the army, using the limp excuse that it was in its way its own guarantee of the gods' favor. The same life, the same bath, the same sword and personal equipage through all of my travels and wars. Regard this tub. It has become a reflection of myself, a much-used thing, prematurely aged, quite unnaturally beaten and dented and scarred in performance of its duty. There, at the foot, is a crumpling, left as a memorial of that clumsy donkey responsible for its transport across Macedonia. The beast fell over a cliff, and it took half a cohort of men to retrieve the tub. Yes, as am I, dilapidated. So many dents and scratches acquired, hanging around on camels in Africa, horses in Aquitania, barges, sleds, quinqueremes, caquets, and the backs of slaves in Thrace, Dalmatia, Britannia, and Lusitania. Silva wondered idly if he should give the tub a rank and medal for service and perhaps promote it once a year. He looked down at his body. It matched the bath all too well, even to the bronzing provided by the Judean sun. There was the molded crater in his right thigh, the souvenir of a Thracian javelin, which the surgeon, a rather clever Greek, had thought better to dig out rather than pull through. The fellow had first soaked a sponge in mandragora juice, then placed it in your mouth. As he had predicted, the juice slipped down to your digestive tract, and its soporific effect at least partially eased the pain when he cut away and tied off the blood vessels, and finally cauterized their orifices with a hot iron. The result was a well-healed blemish, now sharing an originally well-formed body with a rather full complement of others. "I had better do all I can to sharpen my wit," he said to Epos, his Numidian, "because this over-abused carcass is becoming a thing of very little value." It pleased him to make a confidant of the Numidian, since the man was deaf and dumb, yet not as a consequence of nature, which would have left him merely another uninteresting slave. His former master had been a magistrate and tax farmer in Cyprus, and it seemed Epos had observed him seduce a Cypriot boy, and had been so unwise as to confirm the fact when the consul's hopelessly narrow-minded wife began to ask questions. While it was intriguing to reflect on what might have been Epos's fate had he refused to testify before the wife, the magistrate's fury was forever recorded. Determined that Epos would pass on no more gossip concerning himself or anyone else, he had ordered his eardrums destroyed with repeated and prolonged head-slapping, and then had one half of his tongue removed. Soon after, the jealous wife killed the magistrate over a subsequent affair, again with a boy, and eventually Epos, as part of the estate, was sent off to the Antioch market where Silva had bought him. And why not? He was a bargain at a mere 1,000 sesterces, hardly a week's salary for a procurator. Few people wanted a mute hovering about, but for a general of the legions who must have his own secrets, how could there be a better attendant? As Epos oiled his body, Silva wryly inspected his own powerful chest, noting with pleasure the absence of a fat about his middle, and with casual regret his legs, which were much too long for the bath. The right leg, with its scar of Thracian revenge, was muscular and as fine a limb as ever. But the left, without a scratch on it, was now almost a third less in diameter, and visibly shorter by almost 2 inches. Procrastination again during the attack on Jerusalem. Sextus Cerealis, commander of the 5th Legion, had maneuvered himself into a tight spot. He should have known better than to arrange a parley with the Jews. The dunce had convinced him that for a few thousand shekels he would be told of some easy entrance to the city. He had agreed to take only 4 men as escort, and of course was ambushed. Cerealis, who was a much better politician than a soldier, would never have orated again if you had not chanced along the same gully with a troop of horses. The Jews fled, and you swung down from your horse very much the haughty fellow. Too quickly. Instead of Cerealius's thanks, you soon received his sympathy, for in your hasty dismounting you had landed on a rock instead of solid earth, sprawled face down in the dust in a most undignified manner, and somehow managed to part most of your Achilles tendon. The pain was endurable when diluted with wine, so it had been nearly a week before you had summoned the Greek surgeons. They had contrived poultices of elaterium without favorable result, so they had filled you with poppy tear pills, and once again they had cut and tied. They said the leg would always be short, and you would limp forever. A gimpy old man at 37. Zeus! You could not catch a turtle. As a final and bitter reminder of the event, Cerealis had managed to have his cipher of a son assigned to your staff. Now there was a lad to make a man grateful he had remained childless. The warmth of the bath and the oiling of his body eased Silva's wine depression, yet he found it impossible to avoid brooding about the Jewess. "I have marched across the world," he said to Epos, "and never have I known such aggravation with a female." Moments after Sheva had been taken from his tent, he had bellowed for Attius his aide and dispatched him to the camp of the 3rd cohort with a new order. A counter-order to my original order, Epos. Confusion at headquarters. Counter-order my counter-order. Another way of confessing I want to stall until I can think of something else. Master procrastinator that I am. She is now back in her comfortable tent enjoying a morning laugh with her conniving relatives. When the Numidian began to scrape the oil from his back and arms with a bronze strigil, Silva warned him to be gentle, even though he knew he would not be heard. "I am in a delicate condition this morning, and the coming heat is going to make me whimper." The anticipation of yet another day in the desert suddenly seemed to multiply his loneliness, so that even the rumble of his own voice became reassuring. "When I was a young boy, Epos, a Greek nurse bathed me, and I can remember her taking an extra long time to wash my jewels. I could not understand why she would be grinning all the time she was at it, until one day I found out the pleasant way. and I've been trying to find a home for my staff ever since." He splashed his hands in the tepid water and studying them said, "If I have one claim to fame, Epos, it is that there is not a single ring on my fingers. I believe I am the only Roman in the world who refuses to wear one or a dozen. My wife Livia, whom I love more than my very breath, bought me all sorts of rings, and I refused to wear them. After she perished, I took a concubine, who vowed she would not be seen in public with me unless I wore at least 2 rings. And I refused. It was the same with playing the flute. Both my Livia and the concubine insisted I tootle away because it was the thing being done, and nothing I could say would convince them I had no ear for music. Once, to please the concubine, I did pack a flute to Lusitania, intending to practice, but after 10 minutes' insult to the instrument, I knew I had been right in the first place, so I threw it in the Tagus. When I returned after a year and a half, my concubine asked me to blow her a tune, and I said, "Would you rather have a tune or a romp on the couch with me?" She said she would rather have a tune first, so I handed her an ivory phallus I had bought in the market in Valentia, and told her to go play a tune for herself. And that was the last I ever saw of her. While the Numidian massaged the remaining film of oil into his shoulders, Silva tried dutifully to exercise the lids of his left eye, which drooped until the eyeball itself was barely visible. The deep cut, extending from his chin, diagonally crossed his lips, and terminating at the helmet line, had severed the orbicularis muscle. With exercise, the surgeons had promised he might some day regain use of the lid. Nonsense! 6 years had gone by since that Gallic brute had left his mark, and if anything, the lid was drooping ever lower. Well enough. At least, if it had closed completely, sleep would come easier. Quite a story about my fluting, is it not, Epos? But somewhat afar from the truth. I invented it to cover my real trouble, for I did not present the phallus to my concubine with any such carefree dash. I sent it to her by messenger, who also carried my deep apologies. She was a woman of great humor, and I hoped the symbol would cause her at least to smile, if and when she ever thought of me again. I hoped by bringing mirth to her lips that admirable woman would forgive my total failure to successfully consummate our partnership even so much as once. Give me credit for trying, Epos, as indeed I tried later with so many others. Believe me, Epos, I called upon every god to help me, and I called in every quack, every priest I could find, every sorcerer and adviser. In the way of aphrodisiacs, I tried hot and cold mud baths. I drank the urine of a bull, mixed according to a secret formula with goat hooves crushed at dawn. I ran around the Circus Maximus at midnight, starting once on my left foot and once on my right. I dipped my thumbs into the springs at Clitumnus, kissed the snout of a boar, drank a daily portion of egg whites, cinnamon, and hot mead until I retched at the thought of another, and I made a special pilgrimage to the Alps so I could stand naked before the summer thunderbolts. I hired harlots and their pimps to perform for me, while with another more than willing partner, I worked up the most awesome sweats attempting to duplicate their feats. And all, Epos, was a failure. No sensation, visual or auditory. No touch or odor could erect my standard. For reasons I cannot comprehend, he has absolutely refused to stand duty since the loss of my wife. And that was a long time ago, Epos. Long ago there have been periods when I thought I should lose any reason because of it. Times of such despair I seriously considered cutting my veins. This Jewess has made him stand again. She has but to pass through my line of vision, and I feel the blood coursing toward my formerly retired friend. He pulsates as if he were a youth. He stands again as my spear. What should I do, Epos? Is this Jewess the only woman in the world of appeal to him, or has there been some internal change which would not enable me to satisfy any woman? Should I keep the Jewess or send her away? Should I test him against another female? I am afraid of that, supposing I should fail. Epos, what shall I do with this Jewess who hates me? Silva bent forward and arched his shoulders so the Numidian could better scrape down his back. How he longed for a real Roman bath, with its laconicum, to draw the soreness from his muscles, and a tepidarium, where he could meet with other men of like status and discuss how the empire was being ruined by sycophants, fools, and opportunists. They must agree that the youth of Rome had grown soft and inexcusably spoiled, the doing of over-indulgent Roman mothers, who owned an alarming proportion of the national wealth. Epos, my silent friend, can you imagine that it used to be against the law to leave any part of your estate to a woman if it amounted to over 100,000 sesterces? But they got around that by persuading their husbands to leave it to a friend who had guaranteed to pass it on to the wife, so that now they own a part or all of everything in sight, and Vespasian will have to do something about it, or will all soon be their slaves. Silva pushed himself to his feet so the Numidian could scrape his legs, and while he waited, he thought how much better he would feel if he could take this wine of remorse through the frigidarium, shouting and slapping his backsides as the steam arose from his body. I am out of touch, he thought, out of touch with Rome, which means out of touch with life. With the imperial post taking from 30 to 50 days, how could anyone even hope to sense the trends in the capital of the world? I drown myself in wine because I have no other friend, no person on the earth who will care about my troubles, nor seek me out for myself. And furthermore, he said aloud as he stepped from his bath, I, Flavius Silva, am sick of Flavius Silva and his endless sorrows for himself. Epos held a mirror before Silva, while he carelessly shoved at the curls about his head. Balding, he murmured, and the rest might do for an actor's mask, provided he must represent a long-neglected jar of wine pickled in the sun and torn by the winds, and badly cracked down one side. He passed a finger along the deep scar left by the gall. You are exceptionally pretty this morning, he said to the mirror. Who else bears a cut that changes with the color of last night's wine? Silva preferred to shave himself, and when he had finished, he burnished his teeth with a powdered mixture of calcined bones, oyster shells, and a scrupulum of nitre, which was said to be an aid towards strengthening the gums. He reached out for his short pantaloons, which the Numidian held out to him, and when he had pulled them on, he sat on a chest so Epos could tie his sandals, which were the chamois and adorned with a miniature fox's head at the upper limit of the lacings. but hobnailed along the sole in the same style as any legionaries. Epos held a tunic before him with the bottom end open. He dived into it, and when his head emerged through the neck, he was astonished to see a stranger standing just inside the tent entrance. No, he thought, he is not a stranger at all. Beneath that ridiculous get-up was Pomponius Falco, the one man in the great city of Rome Silva decided instantly whom he was least interested in seeing. And with him, of course, standing shyly just inside the entrance, was one of his pretty boys. By the gods, Falco, how did you get here? A most arduous journey, I assure you, dear fellow, and after such effort I had rather expected a warmer welcome. He touched the hand of the youth beside him. I present Cornelius Tertullus, also formerly of Ravenna. I'm not particularly honored, Silva said, ignoring the youth. He was watching Falco's cruel eyes dart about the tent, and he knew they would be inquiring into every detail of his personal life. The scoundrel was wearing a wig or had his hair curled. It mattered not which, and he reeked of nard and perfume as always. His fingers were cluttered with rings, and Silva now remembered his very bad complexion, instead of treating it with galls, or horehound, or bitter vetch in the normal manner of those so afflicted. Pomponius Falco was known to travel with a herd of asses so he could make a dough of their milk and smear his face with it before he retired. How cheering it was now to observe how the ceremony had not remedied his appearance in the slightest. But careful. Whatever the stories about Pomponius Falco, and however much the urge to express your loathing, it is best to bear in mind that he can be an exceedingly dangerous man. He has an accountant's mind with a nearly incredible memory for people's affairs, gossip, and deeds. A very feminine mind, Silva thought. He was one of those quick and shrewd men who these days so infested the capital. Like so many others, he had become rich by participating in stock companies which bought the revenues of a province at public auction. By some fluke, or more likely by deliberate connivance, Silva thought Pomponius Falco had managed to become chairman of his company. During the 5 years of exclusive rights enjoyed by the winning bid, he had squeezed enough income to buy other rights and companies. Now he was supported by his flow of dividends, and no one knew his true wealth. 3 years had passed since he had seen Falco. But if the rumors were true, then he had managed to endear himself with Bernice, who in turn must have persuaded Titus that he should be proclaimed ver perfectissimus, a most excellent man. As a dutiful son, Titus would naturally pass on the impression to Vespasian, who might be so ill-advised as to name him ver clarissimus, a most illustrious man. If you had sent word ahead of your coming, I might have been better prepared, Silva said carefully. As it is, I am afflicted with a monstrous head. My gizzard is stiff with verdigris, and my liver frothing with bile. While I officially welcome you to Judea, I will remind you that entrance to my tent particularly at this ungodly hour of the morning, is subject to announcement and prior appointment, regardless of the supplicant's rank. I suggest you return later in the day when I have done with my pressing businesses." The Numidian was holding out Silva's skirt of leather studded with brass. He buckled it around his waist and pretended that he had lost interest in Falco. "I will call one of my tribunes, who will see to it that you and your party are made as comfortable as the limited resources of this outpost permit." When Falco replied, Silva heard a touch of deep anger in his normally thin voice. How satisfying! With what dreadful affectation did the man embroider his Latin? "I am not supplicating anything. I have come a long way, endured considerable expense, and suffered outrageous hardships to bring you word straight from the Emperor. Here is the word." Silva accepted the short roll of heavy paper and forced himself at least to appear indifferent. "But I am a poor actor," he thought, while his peacock had made a career of it. "No matter what display crosses my face, he must realize it is not every day the hand of Vespasian reaches out so far across the world to touch my own." He broke the seal and read, "The Emperor Titus Falvius Vespasianus, Pontificus Maximus, holding the tribunician power for the 4th year, acclaimed Imperator 12 times, father of his country, consul 4 times, and designate for a 5th, censor to Flavius Silva, general of the 10th legion, procurator of Judea, greeting. I declare that Pomponius Falco journeys to Judea as our approved envoy. He is to communicate certain vital matters to you and render such assistance as he can to alleviate your situation. I, the Emperor Caesar Vespasian, have signed this." Silva noted the scribbled signature and muttered involuntarily, "Blah, blah, 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 blah." He caught himself and took a moment to compose his thoughts. "Well, well, it seems you are on some quasi-official mission. However, I am sure Vespasian would understand the routine demands which obligate every soldier at the beginning of the day. When you have delivered his message, will you have the consideration to let me relieve my eyes and organs?" "Vespasian is annoyed with you." "Indeed. Well, I am annoyed with Vespasian." "You would not dare speak those words before him." "Wouldn't I?" "I will put it in writing. Do you suppose I considered this a reward after the battles I have fought for Rome? I am given the most wretched land in the empire and told to bring it back to life after we have gone to endless trouble killing it. I assure you this is the only tolerable hour of the Judean day, and very soon even the lizards will complain of the heat. If you can discover any amenity to please either mind or spirit in this desert, I will appreciate you informing me promptly so that I may rush to it before it melts. Thus far, I have been unable to arrange any opportunity to increase my purse by service in this wasteland, and the natives are filthier and more irascible than any other we have conquered. We have Jews in Rome, many of them. They are no problem." "Not Jews like these. These are all crazy. The large majority of these people are so devoted to squabbling amongst themselves they have no time or interest in anything else. Some of them actually took off after the beggar they call the Christ, despite the fact the man is supposed to have died something like 40 years ago. The only industry or agriculture I have so far been able to encouraged has been as a consequence of the lash. I assure you, the sight of the Roman to these people is an open invitation to their daggers. Of this wilderness, populated by people who would rather fight than eat, I am supposed to make a Roman republic, and with very little assistance from Rome, I might add. Silva thrust his arms forward with his fists closed. With practiced ease, the Numidian moved around him, strapping on his brass epaulates and armored jacket. Falco raised a jeweled hand to his ear and toyed with the lobe. He glanced at Tertullus as if he wanted to be assured of his full attention and said, "But, General, certainly we cannot deny that Judea is conquered. Triumphs have been celebrated and arches erected to commemorate our victory. Coins have been minted." "So I understand," Silva growled. "And all is well in Judea, save for some 900 individuals perched just above the tent who stubbornly refuse to admit they are conquered." "That is precisely why I am here. Both Vespasian and Titus are displeased with the situation. Now at least I have some clue why you have come so far. Next I shall be fascinated to learn what you are going to do about it." "Vespasian finds it embarrassing that a handful of miserable Jews can so long resist Roman arms. It is difficult to explain in the Senate. You are his legatus. Our esteemed emperor's triumphs were somewhat premature. Are you suggesting this rabble can hold out indefinitely?" Silva took a long, deep breath and told himself to chain his patience. A long time ago, a certain Jew called Herod fortified the top of Masada. For his personal comfort, he built 2 palaces up there. He also had a strong sense of the practical and some very clever engineers. He filled the warehouses with food enough for thousands of people and prepared and preserved it so carefully, it is keeping the present occupants of his ruins very healthy. And the soil is such they grow the greens they need. The same Herod built enormous cisterns and took water to them this very hillside via a system of rock channels. If you are trying to confuse the issue, General, I assure you I know very well that it never rains in the desert. Do you now? Well, I will augment your education to the extent of assuring you that it does, at least enough for Herod to have troubled constructing 2 major aqueducts. We have destroyed both of them, but we are quite unable to do anything about the water already in the reservoirs, which I am informed is in sufficient supply to last them several more years. As for so-called rabble, by which you conveniently identify the people up there, you may better appreciate their stubborn and recalcitrant nature if you also understand they are fighting side by side with their families and are led by one Eleazar ben Yair, who happens to be a very clever and resourceful commander. A sword will not cut stone. I did not come all this way to hear platitudes. You will suffer more than platitudes if you annoy me further." There was a moment's silence in the tent, broken only by metallic clicks, as Silva buckled his sword by his right side, legion style. Then Falco said slowly, "Nor did I expect to find our emperor's deputy whoring with Jewish women." Silva lowered his head and pressed his lips tightly together. He thought, "I am not going to tiptoe around this fawn with fangs any longer." He baits me on the wrong morning, so I am going to kill the bastard right in my own tent." He half drew his sword, then slowly slipped it back in its scabbard. "Keep your temper, Winehead. Pomponius Falco does not venture anything without the most careful preparation. More than full protection will be standing by just outside the entrance, and his fancy boy remains within a cubit of the flap. He will certainly scream for aid, and the regrettable death of Flavius Silva, along with his Numidian, could easily be explained by so grand a personage as Pomponius Falco. Poor fellow! Discouraged over his inability to conquer Masada, he has fallen on his sword, and there was no use in denying Java. Falco undoubtedly knew all about her long before he came to the desert. Mails to Rome might take over a month in transit, but word of mouth flew on wings of a falcon. "She is not a whore," Silva said deliberately. "Ah, then, just a naughty lady, I suppose, privy to the secrets of our military commander in Judea, and therefore able to pass them on to her own people? How convenient." "That's ridiculous. You assume there are any secrets in Judea, Roman or otherwise. Nor did I expect to find the man Rome has entrusted with such grave responsibility so sodden with wine he either is incapable or unwilling to properly welcome his emperor's envoy." Silva took a step towards Falco, then another, until he could almost touch him. At last he halted, knowing that if he approached closer he would be unable to resist reaching for his throat. His voice trembled with his anger. "I do not welcome parvenus to my camp. I do not welcome advisers and schemers who come to see a few of my soldiers die so they can return to Rome as experts on the situation. I do not value military advice from those whose battles have been fought in the marketplace. The longest journey you've ever made started on the day your uncle reached into the bowels of his second family, plucked you from the slums of Ravenna, chewed on you for a while, and then spat you out into the sewers of Roman society. I will concede you are a fast traveler, but nothing you have ever done recommends you as a soldier." The Numidian held his helmet. Silva reached for it as Falco said, "You are an uncouth military beast." "Right. Now you will excuse me for my duties. Get some rest and take your little friend with you. He must be weary." "I must hide my uneasiness," Silva warned himself. "He is waiting for the slightest hint. I fear him." Silva blew some imaginary dust from the plume of his helmet, tucked it under his arm, and stepped around his two guests. He drew back the tent flap and congratulated himself, for there stood Falco's preparations for any serious opposition. Waiting just outside the entrance, barely a javelin's length away from his own Praetorian guards, was a solid block of perhaps 20 auxilia, Germans from the looks of him. It was now becoming fashionable among men of influence in Rome to employ such barbarians as bodyguards. As well they might, Silva remembered, since they were loyal to their nearest superior and utterly fearless. Silva managed a smile as he turned back to Falco. He spoke with a deliberate Sicilian inflection to his Latin, so his own men would be certain to understand him. "I must say you do travel in style." He glanced contemptuously at the Germans. "I hope you brought enough feed for these animals." He stepped into the scorching sun and was about to advise Falco that he would send an officer with instructions about suitable quarters when he suddenly changed his mind. The great noise had ceased. How long had it been so? He remembered the volume had been normal during his bath, but then there had been a little time while he was dressing. If it had stopped before Falco's arrival, then most certainly he would have noticed it. Silence in this place meant only one thing. Eleazar Ben Yair was on the wall.